be here now. Just be here now.
Hey everyone, it's Raghu, Markus, back with Mindrolling, and somebody who I haven't actually physically seen in a long time. Like so many of us, we have a lot of people. Boy, we haven't seen you in a couple of years. It's kind of weird. Danny Goldberg, Danny, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
You too.
So
great to be had.
That's like that reminds me of Keith Richards when he was on a talk show or something, and the host said, "Really great to have you here, Keith." And Keith Richards said, "Happy to be anywhere."
Yeah,
happy to be anywhere.
Yeah,
really, huh? So we haven't seen each other in a while, as I said, and Danny has some wonderful podcasts on Be Here Now Network. Which he stopped after a certain amount of them were done, great ones with all sorts of wonderful people, to devote himself to his writing part of his career, and so ensued currently a book called Bloody Crossroads 2020, Art, Entertainment, and Resistance to Trump, which is coming out when?
It was published on November 2nd.
Oh, just came out.
As we speak, it's been out for a couple of weeks.
So certainly want to talk about that, and but at the same time want to just catch up with you in terms of what's gone on in how you can just relate your life, your personal experience with what has been going on with the pandemic, racial justice, on and on and on. Of course, Trump's been gone, but he's not gone. That's the interesting thing. As I read through this book, by the way, this book, everybody, has the kind of detail that it would be, it's extraordinary, Danny. How the heck? I bet that was one of my main questions. This must have taken some real, forget research. Did you do this on your own?
I did. I did it completely on my own. Obviously, it was mostly written during lockdown. So I had the ability to concentrate. I had no choice but to concentrate, and I had I kind of knew what I was looking for. And there are things I don't like about the internet age, but one of the things I do like about it is you can research on it. You don't have to go to a physical library the way people used to have to do research. And I did about 30 interviews for it, but the majority of it was really just researching and then curating from thousands of different examples of political art, political comedy, political songs, as well as activism by artists, singers, actors, directors, and so on. And it was kind of interesting for me as a writer because it was the first time I was documenting something in real time. Usually I've written about things from the past. And although the first section of the first 1/4 of the book covers some historical context, the majority of it was the year 2020, the year of that campaign. And I just spent a few hours a day. One part of it was researching, and the other part of it was looking at the old research and turning it into prose and rewriting and that whole thing. So it just became kind of an obsession, which is the best way to do a book because you have to kind of be obsessed to want to go through the process of it,
Yeah. No, absolutely. Anyhow, it's pretty extraordinary, everybody out there. And those of you who feel akin to the reality, which has been going on since Danny and I guess, were hippies back in the 60s, 70s. The importance of music in my own life is paramount. And I know Danny because this was Danny's career throughout his life. And one question that's more like an interview question, and I don't even do that, but I was curious about it, is how did you personally feel as you went through, you did all this research, you found these incredible stories of different artists and what they have done, what they represent, and so on. How does that hit you personally after all these years being in the music business and being involved in politics and being so having so much care about the union of art and really social life, including politics and so on? How did that hit you?
Firstly, I had this idea for a while that the political media, the historians, the journalists, cover too narrow a band of America, that I think they have hard jobs. I think they probably do their jobs. The good ones do them the best, of what can be done. But it's so framed by the polarity and the dialogue that's created in Washington and the research they do about swing voters and all this sort of thing. But the actual sort of moral and ethical conversation going on writ large in the country as a whole is wider. And there are other participants, and artists are among them. They're certainly not the only ones. They're religious leaders, they're academics. They're just people, talking around the proverbial kitchen table, or, you can't say the bar or the barbershop when you're talking about the pandemic year, but the metaphorical conversations people have. But there's just no question that the creative community has a vast audience. And, someone like Taylor Swift, had more Twitter followers than Trump did. And so I wanted to widen the lens. Then the other feeling, and I felt that for a while, that there was something too narrow about the sort of official political conversations going on, that we're dealing with only part of the process by which society as a whole makes decisions. Then I did believe, and this was the impetus for the book, that there was a big paradigm shift after Trump was named president by the Electoral College. I say it that way because he did get fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, but that's the system, the undemocratic, quasi-democratic system that we inherited from the 18th century. And that there was a huge influx of energy in the creative community as a whole. I think part of that was motivated by the fact that Trump himself really was created by Hollywood. I mean, it was the 14 years of him starring in The Apprentice that sort of branded him, as the great businessman and the celebrity that he then was able to very skillfully use to attain political power. And I think a lot of people in the entertainment business felt that, reality television has very little to do with reality, and that these are scripted, edited things. And if those kind of skills, those kind of storytelling skills were going to actually determine policy about, family separation at the borders or tax rates for billionaires or all sorts of other things, that a lot of artists who previously were not involved got involved. Somebody like Robert De Niro, I don't remember him ever saying anything political before Trump was president. And then he was like constantly talking about it. And pop icons, the previous generations of gigantic pop stars, Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Justin Timberlake, very rarely, maybe Madonna would be involved with a particular issue like gay rights, but very, very limited in any political content. Whereas this generation of Demi Lovato and Cardi B and Taylor Swift felt it was just part of their calling to do it. And, when Jon Stewart started The Daily Show, when he started hosting it, I think it was 1999, he was the only one every night combining comedy and politics. After Trump, it was every show, every night.
Yeah.
So the magnitude of the phenomenon of artists wanting to participate was greater. And then the final element that's unique about these, the Trump years was that the evolution of the mass media and the growth of social media. So you have this fragmentation that makes it that gives an advantage to people who are already famous, whether it's LeBron James or Cardi B or Trump. So it was just a different playing field and level of intensity of the kind of discourse going on at that level. People refer to it in shorthand as Twitter, but it's not just Twitter. It's the whole panoply of social media and digital media combined with the old media. Just that phenomenon sort of gave a greater voice, I think, to this newly motivated creative community. So I just found that things I'd kind of been interested in for a long time. I mean, look, going back to Uncle Tom's Cabin, we've had art influence American political moral ideas. The Harriet Beecher Stowe anti-slavery novel that Lincoln credited with turning a lot of white opinion against slavery. And even in history of Europe, go back to the ancient Greeks or Victor Hugo, or, there's been a long tradition of artists commenting on the issues of the day because they have a different perspective and a different relationship with the public than conventional politicians do. But the intensity level in the last few years, I think, is unprecedented. And I just wanted to document it and also just try to, because this is, the Be Here Now network, I do want to say, and to try to tune into what are the moral and spiritual underpinnings of this conversation, that to just get there's such an addictive quality to the tit for tat of the day by day 24-hour news cycle that I would often get nauseated even by people I agreed with politically, because the didactic, divisive tit for tat nature of it. And it's to find a balance between righteously standing up for what you believe and still having compassion for the humanity of everybody else is a tremendous challenge in the modern era. And there were some artists who owned that and who tried to address it in a way that people running for office couldn't address it. And I think it expanded the conversation. So, that's what the book is about. And I just feel glad that creative people exist. They're flawed human beings. Some of them are not very nice people. Some of them are very self-centered. Some of them are not that bright outside of their particular vocation. But I think adding their voices to those of people who make their living by getting elected and reelected, or who make their living by getting ratings on a news show, makes the society a little better instead of a little worse. And, these are times that try men's souls, as Thomas Paine said back in the day. And I just try to find heroes and people to admire. And, that's kind of the quest. But, how did I feel? Depends what day you would ask me. Many days, it depends which hour of the day. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one, right at the very beginning of the book, though, there's one quote that you make that is a guide star to the issue, basically. And you quote Bruce Springsteen. There are two sides of the American character. One is transient, restless, solitary, of which, of course, Bruce represented in 3/4 of his songs that he ever wrote. In some
Born
way
to
or
Run.
another.
Yeah.
But the other, he says, is collective and communal, in search of family, deep roots, and a home for the heart to reside. These two sides rub up against one another always and forever in everyday American life. Boy, that does succinctly say very much what's going on.
He's got a gift for words, that dude.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, he's certainly one of the characters in the book. First of all, I had met him 40 years ago when he did his first political stuff with the No Nukes concert. Secondly, he was so engaged in 2020. He actually narrated one of Biden's TV ads. He performed right after the inauguration, et cetera. And he commented, particularly after the murder of George Floyd, he had this radio show on Sirius that he started during the pandemic. So, and he's an extraordinary poetic soul who tries to maintain. He told me, he said, look, he has family members who voted for Trump. You know, he knows that parts of his audience did. That I think that although he's very clear in his opinions, I think he had a compassionate understanding of those different forces. And that is
what
a
do you
complicated
have going on
balance
right now? Jesus.
Well, I'm in Manhattan, New York City, you know, and that's there's obviously
there's something going on right now.
Or a police car.
As Rosanna Dana, whatever, said,
it's always something.
There's always something. Yeah.
That cosmic thing of individuality versus community. And I relate to that myself. I mean, as you say, you and I from the hippie generation, I mean, part of what I was really into was my own individuality and not having to obey the rules. And why should anyone tell me not to smoke dope, or why should anyone tell me to go into Vietnam or things like that? But there is a balance between individuality and community that's the struggle of civilizations, you know, and great philosophers have written about it. And, you know, there is a sense that things are a little tipped out of balance. You know, there's something about this wonderful technology that allows us to do this conversation, allows podcasts to exist, and allows so much information available that's also somehow shredded the idea of community as a whole in a way that feels a little weird.
Yeah. Yeah. But those of you who are listening, because we know each other so well, I forget that I have to mention, of course, we did mention Danny's been in the music business for a very long time and involved with running Warner's division and Polygram. Remember that name? That's gone.
Well, the name Mercury still exists.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, right.
But all the old companies. Look, when I was at, when you and I were working together, when you had Triloca Records and I was at Mercury, I mean, the big media thing was MTV. The big retail thing was Best Buy and Tower Records. Some of these things either don't exist or they're so totally different. And, you know, instead, we have the phenomenon of streaming. And it's just a different playing field. But the moral arguments between individualism versus community, tribe versus inclusiveness, those are the same arguments that have gone on, you know, before there was, you know, television, during television, digital time. You know, these are old moral conversations, almost that, my goodness, I was reading today, I downloaded onto the Kindle the collected works of Vivekananda. So, because I've read Ramakrishna so many times and I never really read Vivekananda. And now I have hundreds of pages on the Kindle. And I started, and right at the beginning, he's talking about how in 1893, the forces of fanaticism and tribalism, and you would have thought he was talking about now. And this was from 130 years ago, you know, before there was radio, before there was, you know, I don't think anyone was driving in cars yet or no airplanes. And, you know, India was still a colony of the United Kingdom and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I some of the conversation in his speech he made this famous speech in Chicago at some convention of big thinkers. I mean, it could have been last week. The moral questions, the questions of how people live together. So it's kind of interesting to explore that, and I think artists explore that in a different way and through a different lens than journalists or politicians. And we need both. We need journalists. We need politicians. Somebody has to do these jobs. It's a different skill set. I admire people who run for office, but I also admire artists who widen the frame of the conversation.
Yeah. So I was giving a little bit of your specific background.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. And but more to the point, and your involvement with the ACLU, and I mean, Danny, everybody out there has really lived in a few different worlds, and for a very long time, including the world of consciousness. I actually,
you've lived a pretty long time too. Are you younger than me? I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I'm
71. What are you?
I'm going to be 59 next week. Is that Jack Benny? I don't know. 49.
39. No,
39.
Jack Benny always said it was
39. You got to advance it. Yeah. Anyhow, but more to the point, I have always, Danny, wanted to check in with you around all of what we are talking about right now, because I find myself getting wrapped up in the polarization by virtue of the finger pointing and shaking at whatever the latest horror is on the news or social media, whatever it is. And I always count on you for a broader perspective that includes history. And you've mentioned a couple of things. This has been going on forever. I mean, this the way the tribalism and the polarity, and then the commentary from bards. Back in the day, they would be called bards that are singing different. Yeah. So this that perspective really, really does help, and as does the perspective, as you said a little bit earlier. There is, we are engaged with what we are engaged in now, which includes a lot of fear around from the virus and the pandemic. It includes the polarization, tribal fears. It includes feeling like, wow, is there anything that is going to transform this kind of situation? And then that takes me back to what you said about we have to include consciousness perspective, spiritual perspective. And what I always point to is Ram Dass saying, until we really clean up our own hearts, it's very difficult to be effective in any kind of social action. That doesn't mean you stop until you get there, which may be a few thousand lifetimes where you actually love everyone. As Ram Dass actually got to a great degree in his life. But you do them both at the same time. And that's, I think, what this is all about. This and you writing this book and giving a real perspective on the importance of, especially in this age, of speaking out when you have that kind of audience.
Yeah, and I think different artists have different levels of consciousness also, like any other community. But the best of them, like Springsteen or like Mandy Patinkin, who's very, very active in the campaign and just was very recently been very active in being one of the many chorus of people to try to get the death sentence commuted in Oklahoma, which was successful. Frames a lot from his Jewish faith, his idea of justice. He's very into trying to understand and have compassion for people he disagrees with, but also unafraid to take a position, even if it's controversial. And so, I think that artists struggle with this the way the rest of us do, how to love everybody and still stand up for what you perceive as right versus what you perceive as
justice.
Wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy place to be, but it's what's required. I mean, and it is harder the more millions or hundreds of millions of people are involved in the conversation. I mean, my wife's brother is the mayor of a very small town in northern Connecticut, which is voted 65% for Trump. It's a town of about 3,000 people. He's a lefty, politically, but he knows his neighbors. He cares about fixing a bridge or what the funding is for the school and deals with those issues. And every issue became polarized. One of the signature characteristics of this Trump era has been the everything becomes politicized, like wearing a mask or getting a vaccine. I mean, insane. there were always polarizing feelings in the society, at least going back to the Civil War, and the McCarthy period and all the Vietnam period. But the fact that everything sort of somehow, so many other things, but he's been able to deal with it. He's going to, I think, write about this in a couple of years when he's out of office, because the scale of the conversations is small enough that it's 50 people in a room, it's one-on-one. It creates a context to try to remember, okay, well, you might disagree about politics, but you might like the same food. You might, your kid might go to the same school, and that there are models of people dealing with disagreements in a productive way. And it's kind of the soul of what democracy is supposed to be. But the more and more it becomes so many millions and tens of millions of hundreds of millions of people, and the ability to, isolate small groups in this sort of way of demonizing the other. And, look, it's very, if I see someone wearing a MAGA hat, do I have a set of assumptions about them? I do. And I don't want to deny the humanity of that person, even while I don't want to deny my abhorrence with what I consider to be racist or other immoral aspects of that particular presidency. It's a balance that's
very
if you
tough.
do it right, could deal with some of the same things we have to deal with as spiritual people. And again, I think artists contribute to that conversation. I think not every artist does, but I think writ large, that community tunes into different parts of the psyche, to the emotional world, to a deeper place than just the bumper sticker slogan part of politics. So, I think, I would always turn up the volume on artists, even the artists that I don't like, because I think they're tuned into a wider spectrum.
Yeah. And one, you reminded me of something as I was reading, and it was about the Showtime show Billions.
Yes.
And I'm reading and I'm going, I was completely into that show. And for years. And then as I read this, I start to look at myself and go, what was attractive, this horrendous, person who was a little bit multifaceted in terms of who ran the fund, and then the prosecutor, who was also completely an appetizing character, in terms of completely being lost. And what I'm thinking, I wonder what was attracting me to this.
Well, I spoke, the person who created that series, or certainly one of the creators and the showrunner, Brian Koppelman, I spoke to for the book. Mostly he wanted to talk off the record. He understood, I think, that the fan base for Billions includes Trumpers and anti-Trumpers, and how people kind of felt about Axe, Axelrod, Bobby Axelrod, the anti-hero of it, was instructive. And that's in a category of a wider category of art that's been very popular over the last decade, mostly in these series, starting, I think, with The Sopranos and including Breaking Bad and including Nurse Jackie and 6 Feet Under and a lot of other ones, where there was a sense among a lot of creative people that the anti-hero had more authenticity, that it represented more accurately the conflicts within us, and as opposed to the airbrushed hero. And I've often wondered, did that go too far? I mean, like you talk about Bobby Axelrod, what about Tony Soprano? And yet I watched every single episode of both of those series. There's more Billions to come, I think, in January. I think there's a new season. And I think the advantage of that kind of art is it allows us to explore these things inside ourselves. And it's a question of, what is the line between shining a light on a certain kind of dark, on a certain kind of bad behavior, and glamorizing it? And it's the difference in a way between good art and bad art. I will say, again, I haven't missed an episode of Billions yet, and there's not a lot of people to root for. But I will tell you one series that has gotten even better this year is Curb Your Enthusiasm. I mean, Larry David is getting so sophisticated. This most recent one where he dealt with an encounter with a Klan member.
That's so terrific.
He is in the comedy realm dealing with some of the deepest issues of race and tribalism with humor and with a level of poetic insight. I think art is a plus, but Billions is interesting that way. I know exactly what you mean. I found myself addicted to it, and yet wondering. By the way, Succession is the same thing.
Yeah,
who are you supposed to root for?
Exactly.
Who am I rooting for in that show?
Yeah.
And yet there's something fascinating about it. But this goes back to a long tradition. If you look at Shakespeare's tragedies, I mean, not a lot of sympathetic characters necessarily, but yet by shining a light on the humanity, somehow can open your heart more, or open your mind more. So I give a lot of birth, although I think there are some pieces of art that are just flat out dark and bring out the worst in people. But I do share your inexplicable affinity for Billions. And a compliment was so cagey. I mean, he didn't want to be quoted about the election, but then he tweeted something very, very critical of Trump. So I said, "Can I quote your tweet?" Yeah. And he said, yes. So he did show his cards on Twitter.
Oh, that's terrific. I mean, look, this stuff, why it is, shall we say, a good thing. To me, there's no spiritual either. This is like, you're going to judge people. Okay, look at what you're doing. Can you be kind at the same time, even if you're protesting what that person is doing? And as Ram Dass would say, a shitty incarnation, what to do. But it's a reflection. I see myself, and I'm hoping, I keep my mindfulness up as much as possible about how I am getting sucked into that particular show, and what are the things that, my desire systems and projections are getting gratified through it. So the reflection is a good thing, and especially if art can do that, and that's what I think you're saying about Shakespeare provided that in spades. And,
he's the master. But the other interesting thing to me is some artists, what they do publicly, say in their civilian life as quote unquote activists or volunteer work, is very consistent with what they do as an artist. I would say Springsteen being exhibit A of that.
Yeah.
But then you've got the phenomenon of John Voight or Eric Clapton, who are two people that are, taking positions publicly that I completely disagree with. Voight being an ardent Trumper and an ardent demonizer of quote unquote liberals. And yet I still think he's one of the best actors alive. And, I'm fine with watching him in Ray Donovan or some of the older movies and I disagree with him politically, but he's an incredible actor. Similarly with Clapton, I got a lot of, recently he's been like virulently anti-vax and took a photo with the governor of Texas, who's God created the governor of Texas also. But man, his political positions have been as right-wing as any American politician in our lifetime. And why Clapton needed to take that photo with him and this fanatical anti-vax thing. And yet, what am I going to turn off Layla if it comes on the radio? I'm not going to turn it off. I mean, so the art has people can be channels. The art can exist separately sometimes from the artist in a weird way, although you've got to give the artist the respect of being the vessel for it. And, I find that just an amazing phenomenon, but I'm not saying there's nothing that an artist could do that would make me turn off to them. But so far, I still can listen to Cream, even if I disagree with what Clapton says about vax mandates.
Yeah. And then there's, I read this, this article in Rolling Stone, of course, and they threw in Van Morrison, really.
No, Van, again, he's in the same bucket with Clapton on this subject. I totally disagree with him, but, one of my favorite artists of all time. So I don't know what to make of that. My mother loved the poetry of Ezra Pound, and so did Allen Ginsberg, even though Pound was literally pro-Nazi for a period during World War II. And it's how do you make that distinction? I don't know. There are times when maybe you can't. I can't root for the New York Knicks anymore after James Dolan was so pro-Trump and ejected Charles Oakley from Madison Square Garden. But I can still appreciate the artistry of Clapton and Van Morrison and John Voight, and I think that's a good thing. And I think the idea that Chris Christie loves Springsteen, there's this thing. Chris Christie, Republican governor of New Jersey, and very big Trump supporter. Now he's saying he's trying to distance himself from Trump, but clearly somebody whose politics are very different from mine, is this obsessive Springsteen fan. And he's seen 150 shows. Those certain kind of Springsteen fans that keep track of how many shows they've seen.
Yeah.
And so when my wife Karen and I went to see the Springsteen on Broadway, it was right after Trump got elected, like a few weeks after. Christie was in the audience, like one row away from us. And then, we went backstage because they came out, very sweet, you guys come backstage. And I noticed, so I said to Bruce's manager, John Landau, I said, I noticed you didn't invite Chris Christie backstage. He says, no, we let him meet Bruce once. During Hurricane Sandy, when he was supportive of Obama's rescue efforts, but beyond that, we don't want to, seem to be endorsing him. I'm paraphrasing, John. He said it a little more artfully than that, but but I think that's a good thing. That Springsteen, it may not convert people politically, but they connect with him as an artist and as a human being. So it takes some of the polarization away that that old expression, to disagree without being disagreeable, which is increasingly difficult at certain levels of the society. But, if everyone's singing along to the same chorus, even if they voted differently, they're still singing along to the same chorus. I think that's a good thing. Yeah,
especially at a Bruce Springsteen concert, when that's singing along in that chorus, because he has the ability to transmit heart.
And he says so many times, I quote also in the book, his famous thing. He says, at every show I've ever seen, nobody wins unless everybody wins.
Yeah.
That's an aspiration, but that's a good aspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. And it happens at his shows, briefly for a few hours. Yeah. So the other thing that you inserted into this book from one page to another, or at various places, is what I think is super, super important, that give a sense of what possibilities there are to transform ourselves. And mostly through, of course, the polarity, which is so devastating now that it's It's even to the point where many people are just they're feeling, can this ever change, kind of a thing. It's such a huge divide. And so I think it's important that we, whoever we are, can talk about what are the things that we need to look at in ourselves that can be changed, and how is that going to get affected in society in general. And so you tell this one story, Sarah Silverman, the comedian, and I think she tells the story of the rabid Donald Trump supporters, and she said she found common ground by talking about family issues with them, and they had a low opinion of Obama, but they got health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. We've all looked at that and went, well, wait a minute. That just doesn't mean anything. But she chose to not point out the apparent disconnect, right? Which is interesting as well. And she told the Washington Post, I don't want to make people look dumb. I think people can be changed, but they're never going to be changed by feeling judged. That's a huge critical thing, and I'm so glad that you have had that.
Yeah, I've never met Sarah Silverman. I hope I get to meet her sometime. I'm a huge fan of hers anyway.
Yeah,
and she had this show that was on for a while. I think it was on Hulu. I think it was called "I Love You, America" or something like that. And it only ran a couple of years. It was canceled, I think, in 2019. But that was describing one of the episodes from there. And she really tried to play with that. And she's an ardent lefty. She was an ardent Bernie Sanders supporter who only supported Biden after Bernie withdrew. And at the same time, just had this notion that ran through her series, not only in that episode of trying to connect with the humanity. Chelsea Handler did the same thing in a special she did about white privilege. I forget if it was on Netflix or Amazon, but one of those things where she went and talked to people, and including so-called Republican or Trump places about race. And I think it's an area that's easier for artists to explore than politicians. Politicians have a tough job. They need 51%. Artists, if they get 2 or 3%, they're doing fine. And politicians are susceptible to vulnerable to negative advertising in a way that artists aren't. So there are certain areas that artists can explore to create the space for politicians. And that's certainly what happened with the gay rights movement, where artists had to create the space for politicians to support gay marriage and so on. I think hip hop helped educate a generation of white kids about that policemen look differently if your color was dark than it did if it was white. And she's really interesting, the way she addresses what she does. And she's not the only one. There are some that just love to insult Trump and Republicans every day. Bette Midler tweeting and Rob Reiner, and everybody has a different role to play. But I'm very taken with Sarah Silverman's approach.
Well, and that comment is key to me, to the whole thing.
Yeah.
If we walk around doing that, there's nothing to expect in terms of transformation, crossing the divide between the tribes.
Well, you were so close to Ram Dass, and Ram Dass, on the one hand, in the last decade of his life anyway, had a Republican, had George W. Bush, and then later Trump on his puja table, I think, and as a reminder to love everybody, including people hardest to love. And yet I never had the slightest doubt about who Ram Dass voted for or what his opinions were about the issues of the day. He never was cute about that. You knew how he felt about the war in Vietnam and about the civil rights movement and about politics. So the balance between loving someone and being able to disagree with them on certain things is quite a tightrope. How do you deal with that inside your own head?
I do podcasts with you to remind me There's another perspective. I mean, it's terrible. I see my mind so clearly. It's one thing, doing practice for a long time, and you get older, and you go, okay, now it's like it. Basketball players talk about coming from the college ranks to the pros, and then suddenly they say, at one point after a few years, finally it starts to slow down. The game slows down, and your moment to moment in it is so much more profound, and of course you become a much better player. And the same thing happens. I'm seeing all of this, and I see I just want to jump in and hate that person and just defile and the whole animalistic thing that's in us humans. And so to me, it's a mindful exercise. Period.
Yeah. It reminds me, one of the characters from the 60s that I really admire a lot is Ed Sanders. And
God, who would know him except me?
And he had a group called the Fugs.
Yeah.
And at the peak, this is in 67 or 68, the peak of the anti-war movement and, the polarization of it. He writes this song. I think it was him. It might have been one of his colleagues in the Fugs, Thule Kuffenberg, but he sang it called "Kill for Peace."
Yeah, no,
and it was a brilliant. What art can do. It was an immediate satire about the absurdity of saying you're for peace in an angry tone of voice. It's not going to create peace. Yeah, kill for peace. We
saw that at Goddard, where we were at Goddard at the convention. The thing. Oh my God, that's bringing stuff out of the woodwork.
Kill for peace.
Oh shit.
He's still alive.
Really?
I don't have a regular contact with him, but he lives in Woodstock and incredible legacy as an artist, a poet, 60s character.
But their live act was extraordinarily off the wall. Nothing I have never seen.
Oh my goodness. The first
that.
time I saw the Fugs, I must have been 18 or 19. I couldn't believe that you were allowed to do that on a stage. It was so radical at the time. Today, it wouldn't be as radical, but he was right on the cutting edge. And, he was the one when at the Peace March, when they decided they were magically going to levitate the Pentagon that read this long incantation, most of it written by Allen Ginsberg, but delivered by Sanders. Interesting character. He wrote a book called Fug You that good for people that are obsessed with the 60s, which I'm sure is part of the audience for Be Here Now. It's quite a good memoir.
Okay, so here's what happened to me. I was living in Montreal, where I'm from, and one day we decided to take some acid, and somebody had this very pure Czechoslovakian acid that I decided I'll take two. It must have been, and it's something towards 1,000. I mean, it was so it's the most I ever had taken in my little short life, and so I went into this pretty flipping in and out kind of state. And my friends said, we're going to go to a club and we're going to see this group from the Lower East Side, the Fugs. I'd never heard of them.
So you saw the Fugs on acid?
I was completely in and out of so many different civilizations that I can't tell you. And I went in, and then there he is. There's Ed on at the microphone, acting like it's a phallic thingy.
Right.
Like, oh my God! I mean, that was it. I sobered up so fast you can't imagine. Oh, the Fugs! I'm glad we have that. Okay, before I did want to get this one other thing, because the dispute that plays out. You talk about scientists. Trusting science, and in the 60s you say I never heard this. Opposition to the fluoridation of drinking water was a popular hobby horse in right-wing subculture. Where the hell?
The John Birch Society, absolutely. No, the John Birch Society, which was the cutting edge of the right wing in the 50s and 60s, and certainly inspired the Steve Bannons of the future, and was heavily supporting of Goldwater. There was this belief at that time that the fluoridation of water, which was a health measure that dentists really championed because it dramatically reduced the tooth decay, that was somehow, was similar in a way to the anti-vax paranoia, I would
around
call it.
Mandate,
Others
right?
would say caution. There was an anti-fluoridation movement, and in a few states, I think Utah was one of them, in a few states banned the fluoridation of water. And this was then satirized in the movie Dr. Strangelove, which was certainly one of my favorite films when I was in high school, and a very influential anti-war film, anti-Cold War film. And actually, Oliver Stone, decades later, when he interviewed Vladimir Putin for a series on Showtime, showed him Dr. Strangelove, and then they have this conversation about it afterwards. And in that, the crazy general who decides to trigger a nuclear war without the permission of the president, I think his name was General Ripper, played by I think it was played by Sterling Hayden.
Yeah.
Goes on this rant to Peter Sellers, who played three different parts in it, one of which was as a British officer, because they were allies of the Americans sharing space at a military installation, about the evils of fluoridation and how it, quote unquote, saps your vital bodily fluids. So this was a conversation going on in the 60s. It's mutated in this era. I know people that are anti-vax. Unlike, there are some, I don't know people.
Who doesn't? Or who doesn't know people that are, pro-vax?
Yeah, well, more people are pro-vax. First of all, let's not forget, we are the majority. The majority voted for Biden. The majority voted twice for Obama. The majority supports Democrats for Congress, even though the way that they draw the state lines and everything doesn't always give us a majority in the legislature. And a majority of people have a vaccination. I know, a couple of people that have problems with it, and I empathize because, look, it's not like there's no fear to be had of big pharmaceutical companies. I mean, these are not institutions that seem to be set up just only to do good for mankind. They're gigantic profit machines that have a lot of blood on their hands. Some of them, you look at OxyContin, for example, and other things like that, or the obscene prices in this country versus Canada and other places for, insulin and other drugs. On the other hand, I remember when my first kid, Katie, was, 3 months old or whatever, and I saw the pediatrician, and he says, well, this would be the time for her to get vaccinated, but I have to tell you, there's a 7 in 1 million chance that this bad thing could happen with this vaccine, and there's a 12 in 1 million chance. So finally, I was pretty friendly with the guy. I said, Jay, what did you do with your daughter? He said, she was vaccinated. I said, fine. It's good enough for you. It's good enough for me. Because that's the only way I know how to think about it, is really to ask my doctor. But not everybody has a personal relationship with a doctor. That's like a middle class or an upper middle class luxury. A lot of people go to clinics. They don't get to know the doctors. They're not treated very nicely when they go for their for medical treatment. And I guess they are susceptible to this sort of a thing. And of course, look, nothing is perfect. Seatbelts aren't perfect. They just dramatically reduce the amount of people killed in car accidents. Motorcycle helmets aren't perfect, but it's. I don't personally see why people would choose to be more scared of the vaccine than they are of some snake oil type thing that's being sold on some website saying it's good for you. But it's. That's not a new conversation. What's new is the way it's been politicized.
And you go back to Springsteen's quote in your book, which is the transient, restless, independent, solitary.
Yeah.
You cannot mandate anything, and and that's
but it's not. You can't have a society of millions of people. Based on that, you would have no traffic lights, you would have no speed limits, you would have no controls of pollution, and you would have a lot more suffering. That there is from the earliest societies made rules for the well-being of the society as a whole that individuals had to deal with.
Well,
and
here
the
we
question
are.
is, where do you draw that line?
Yeah, here we are.
How do you draw that line?
Yeah.
And why are you drawing that line? Is it genuinely for the reasons that are said, or is it a manipulated demagogic thing just so people can get high ratings on some cable show or, win a Republican primary? Complicated questions, because there are people of goodwill on the vax thing. I think they're wrong, but it's not just Trumpers who have an issue with that.
No, absolutely not.
Part of the so-called New Age community.
Yeah,
people that you and I know pretty well have had this issue in the past.
Yeah. So the way this polarization is blowing up in every aspect of our lives is pretty extraordinary. It really is. And but
Biden still won. Trump was defeated. He controlled the post office. He controlled a lot of the media. He had enormous amount of money behind him. But there was a collective sense that this was just not the direction that most people wanted to go. Now, we don't know that the majority is going to control what happens next. We don't have a system that reflects the majority all the time. But I'd rather have the majority on our side than on the other side. And look, I don't envy Biden and those folks trying to get their message out. And they make plenty of mistakes, and not all of them are great people. But I think there's better intentions writ large. Through my point of view, as our mutual friend and teacher Bernie Glassman used to say, always good to start every sentence with "in my opinion."
Yeah, no, I love that from
Bernie.
That's
in
so
my
great.
opinion.
So here we're going to end up on a positive note here. Again, I always like to look for the potential for transformation and what ideas and thoughts can help point us in that direction. So the very, very first thing in the book, and this is crazy because this is not something I remember, and it's Bob Dylan. And I'm connecting this in my own way, and it may not be what was intended, but that's the beauty of art. And that is where His Holiness the Dalai Lama suggested that the future is dependent on mothers who have 100% compassion in them, and they transmit that to their children. He said that is what is going to be our potential transformation of the human race, basically. This is not new news, but here's Dylan. Sing of the mountains and the deep, dark sea. Sing of the lakes and the nymphs in the forest. Sing your hearts out, all of you women of the chorus. Sing of honor and fame and glory be. Mother of Muses, sing for me. Bob Dylan. The song is Mother of Muses.
Yeah, I love that song. That album, his most recent album, Rough and Rowdy Ways, came out during the pandemic. And the first song that came out from it was this amazing song, Murder Most Foul, a 17-minute, contemplation and reflection on the JFK assassination, juxtaposed with a tribute to the role of music in the culture. And but the song Mother of Muses ended up being my favorite song on the record. And I'm very grateful I got permission to use the lyrics without having to pay for it, because I didn't have a budget for that sort of thing. And I just love that lyric, Mother of Muses, because muses, are said to be the people who inspire artists.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's a mother of muses, to me, tunes in with the idea of the divine mother of the universe. Yeah. And, there's always been a hint of the spiritual in Dylan. Sometimes it's explicit, like in that song, Every Grain of Sand. Sometimes it's more subtle. But it really had a vibe that reflected kind of the feeling that I wanted to approach the subject matter with. And it's an excuse for me to think about that song, which Sunday Karen and I are going to the Beacon, and I've noticed on the playlist of the songs that Dylan has been doing on this tour, he is going to sing Mother of Muses.
Oh, you're going to see Dylan at the Beacon?
Yeah, if he sings the same, usually when he does a tour, it's pretty much the same playlist once he sets it for the tour. So I think we have a good chance of seeing him sing it live Sunday night at the Beacon.
Very opportune. Well, thanks for being here, Danny.
Hey, Raghu, thank you.
Great.
Thank you for doing all of the podcasts you do and for creating a vehicle for the spirit in the way that you do it and letting me
thank you.
Visit every once in a while.
Thank you. And by the way, there'll be links to Danny's book and probably a couple of links. They'll pick out a podcast or two of yours from the past that might be relevant to everything we're saying now. Be interesting. We'll see what they do. Cool. So again, thank you, everybody. This is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and just visit the plethora of incredible thought leaders and teachers and so on. I was going to say Allen Ginsberg. Jesus. I wonder if we shouldn't see about getting some of Alan's talks and poetry readings. That would be cool. I'll have to talk to you about that offline. But I was going to say Alan Watts is now part of the whole thing. So everybody, we shall see you next week. Bye, Danny.
Bye-bye.